Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Wesley with episode 3 of Just a Chat podcast. Once again, I have the amazing Sean on the show today. Hi, Sean.
Hello.
Nice. How are you? How have you been this past week since we last talked?
I have been good.
Yeah, been up to much?
No.
But really, what have you been doing these days?
Not much. Just chilling, thinking, reading.
Yeah. You're in class, right?
Yes.
One class?
Yeah, one class.
What class are you in right now? What is that class?
It's the class about structures and it's about legal structures and stuff like that.
Lego structures?
Legal
Oh,
structures.
legal.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, what's the course?
The course is about just sort of like policy and legal structures and the philosophy behind that.
Is it a philosophy course or is it?
Yes.
Okay. The philosophy behind legal structures. Okay, that's interesting.
It sounds interesting. It's not
interesting.
as interesting as I hoped it would
Oh,
be.
okay. Yeah, legal structures. I can see how that can get old after a while.
Yeah.
But that's the only class you're in, right? So it shouldn't be too bad to juggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So aside from that, you said you were also like reading, watching stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. How has your reading been going?
Good.
Yeah.
I read every night
Nice.
before bed.
Good habit.
Yeah, the chapter I read yesterday was about getting to places that you want to be.
Right.
And it just sort of don't touched on a couple of things. One of them was sort of this herd immunity idea.
Herd immunity. Can you elaborate?
Just sort of well, everyone else is doing this, so everyone else, so you do it as well. But you don't really know if that is gonna take you where you would like to end up when it comes to planning things out.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've heard of this before. I don't think I've heard of it called herd immunity before, but the concept of just if you put someone in a situation where other people do this thing, it's fairly likely that they'll just copy it without any good reason. Is that just an effect of peer pressure, or is that kind of something that can be explained otherwise?
I don't think it's necessarily peer pressure, but it's just sort of people will emulate what other people are doing, not because they're pressured to, just because if you don't know what you're gonna do, if you don't know what you're doing, you just do what everyone else is doing because, well, if they are doing it, it can't be that bad, right? So that's sort of idea that everyone else is doing it, therefore it is the right thing to. It is okay to do.
I don't like that line of thinking.
Yeah, it's not a good line of thinking because it assumes that they're the same.
Yeah.
It assumes that. Sorry, I just blanked. It assumes. What is the underlying assumption? The assumption is that because people are doing it, that makes it the right thing to do. Whereas those two are not connected at all. We just assume that because people are doing it, it can't be that bad. Well, if everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do. Whereas it might very well be the right thing to do, but you don't know that just off the fact that people are just doing. You don't know that off of the fact that just because people are doing it, that makes it the right thing to do. You don't know that. That's an assumption.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder though, if there's an aspect of because I think I agree with what you said just now, but I wonder if there's also an aspect of I need something to cling to subconsciously, and so people automatically look for something to emulate when they themselves are not sure about whether it just be like a situation or like direction, what to do next, what might happen. And so like you said, I wonder if that's part of why people look at other people doing things and be like, oh, it looks good, so I think I'll copy that because yeah.
I'm not sure, but I don't know. But I do know that I have heard that when people need something to cling to or need some sense of like control or security, that they can that can manifest itself in like different behaviors. Supposedly, I've heard this applied to like what happened earlier this year when people started hoarding toilet paper because like, oh no, all this uncertainty, but I can make sure I have toilet paper, so I'm gonna buy everything the store has.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Okay.
So it sort of makes sense.
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big sort of, but yes, I would say that, yeah.
Yeah. It's also difficult to tell because getting at the subconscious is pretty difficult. Anything meaningful down there. Like you can like prime certain things that like people are thinking of like Cheetos or whatever, but I don't know, I just picked something.
Yeah.
Also, I really hate Instagram ads because it's like you're trying to figure out what people are doing, and then it's like, here, have these cheese puffs.
How do you get your ads on Instagram? I feel like I don't spend that much time on Instagram, so I don't know.
Well, I'm just like looking at people's stories, and then like I get shoved an ad for like whatever. I don't even know what it is sometimes when I like swipe like immediately. I don't know. I really don't like how our socializing has become very commercialized in the sense that, well, you don't need that app, but at the same time, you kind of want that app to just be connected to others.
I don't really feel that way.
Oh?
Yeah. I probably just because I don't care what other people are doing. I try to give myself like a clear reason why I have certain things, why I do certain things, and just because I've learned that I don't like being affected and influenced by other people, it's gotten me into these dicey situations before. So I don't like the idea of just cuz, go with it kind of thing. That might just be me though, because I feel like I see a lot of just do it because everyone else's kind of thing a lot more. So yeah. Yeah, what say you? Do you think that people tends to go with the flow more than anything?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing I think is really worth looking into a lot more often, I think, or a lot more deeper, because it's the underlying psychology, I think, of us, of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose it also depends because, like, with the social media example, it also depends on who's in your social group and what you do. Some people, like, they need to have a developed social media feed in order to, like, get attention for their business or their service or whatever.
Yeah.
And for other people, like, for them it's very big that they be on social media and that they see what their friends are up to. But if, like, your people don't use that, like, if you're not interested in the people that do that, or, like, your friends don't do that, then it's like, why do you need that there's no point in having it unless everybody else has it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, everyone that you follow, not just everyone else in general.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of just FOMO culture that goes around because it's like, yeah, people are afraid of missing out not just on events, but missing out on what's going on, what the latest activity is, and all of that jazz. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am not for it.
Yeah.
I guess it's just I, I used to be like really affected by this kind of thing, but yeah, I'm okay now. I feel like just that I know I don't. I'm caring less. I feel like about just not going to be at this event. Oh, this person didn't tell me about this thing. Oh, look at them having fun. I want to have fun too. No, I don't really. It doesn't affect me as much anymore, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder though, because I've never really thought about like how this change happened, but I mean, I'm glad it did.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so that was an interesting start to our conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a bad start. It's good.
Nope. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, no, keep me up to date with what you're reading, what you're learning. I love hearing these things.
I will.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I remember I had something I wanted to talk to you about. Oh, yes. So, Sean, you study philosophy
Yes.
as your major.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the topic of metaphysics. What do you know about metaphysics, and how has that been significant in kind of just your life, or even just your journey of faith, discovering like God and experiencing him and all that?
This is a big question.
I know, I'm sorry for springing it on you out of the middle of nowhere, but not long ago I was listening to a R.C. Sproul podcast that a friend gave me, and he talked about metaphysics very briefly. He mentioned two types of thinking, or two studies of thinking within metaphysics. One being teleology, or teleology, however you call it, and another being, I don't remember what it was called. But yeah.
You can probably figure it out from teleology and its other. It probably has a complement.
Yeah, no, I wrote this down. I'm reaching for my notes right now just to find what it is. Ontology. There we go. That's the one. Yeah. So I was just thinking about metaphysics recently and just like, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I have no idea where to begin with this.
Well, in your understanding, let's start with what metaphysics is.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to start, if anything.
Yeah. You see, the problem with this is that whenever you ask a philosopher, what is blank, it is a very, very big question. So then they spend at least 5 minutes thinking about where they're going to start and picking the starting point and then how to express everything else. So
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Okay. So what is metaphysics? Let's start there.
Yes.
So metaphysics, as my understanding, well, I should probably explain my background. I took one class on metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
That was literally called metaphysics with Jeremy, where we asked about things like what is a whole and stuff like that.
That question. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
and he probably asked you like the rest of his homework assignments.
I hate it. Yeah. Anyways.
But metaphysics is essentially what is there,
Yeah.
what is out there, what things exist.
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's an interesting definition.
At least that's how I see it. I'm not entirely sure because then from there we study like most of my philosophy degree has been on like legal and logical and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Though I did take a course on different views of God,
Yeah.
so that was interesting. In terms of what things are there, what things exist. Yeah, that's what metaphysics is. I would say metaphysics is about. I'm not a metaphysician, but yeah. I should ask my prof this. It'll be fun. Fun question to see how. Probably like 20-minute answer, but
Yeah. No, I'm sifting
But,
through.
yeah.
I'm sifting through the notes I kind of took while I was listening to Sproul speak about it. He gave a definition for metaphysics. I don't think it's quite the same as what you kind of just said, so I want to bounce it off of you and see what you think. Sproul says metaphysics, or the discipline of metaphysics, involves searching for that which lies above or beyond the scope of the physical.
yeah,
Which is why, in his words, he says philosophy is metaphysical.
yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah?
I agree with that.
Yeah? Okay. And I think that in giving that like very broad, very general statement, it makes thinking about like reason for being, purpose of life, the meaning of life, the meaning of purpose, and all of that kind of stuff. It really brings it close to just the fact that you cannot think about these things without wondering about being created, and wondering about being created, like why things were created, the purpose of creation, who, what created, and the things that go along with that. So I just wanted to bring this up as kind of like a thing to start conversations, I guess. Yeah. So you're not a metaphysicist, which, yes, I understand that, but I think it's interesting that for people who spend their life thinking, they can come to these profound answers and share them. And I appreciate how like some people recognize that not everyone is able to think to the same degree, and so people who do and are able to think are like willing to share their thoughts and all that stuff with other people. Anyways.
Yeah, I think that there's also like from that I should get the sense of that like people should essentially distill all these ideas into something that the rest of the people can use. Yeah, so I try and do things like that, or like at least I would like to think that I'm doing something like that.
Yeah.
The sense that okay, not everyone thinks this way, so essentially what are you supposed to do with this style of thinking that you have? Like how are you supposed to use it to benefit everyone else?
Yeah.
So, with regards to metaphysics and when I think about metaphysics, I just think about, or when I try and think about something metaphysically, I think about what fundamentally is this about? Like what, like sort of like the beyond the physical, beyond what is just sort of like naturally seen there. What is it like? What is this really about? It's sort of like a side note on this is just sort of like it would be interesting to look at like just think about like what exactly the prefix meta means.
Yeah.
Let's see, can I capture that, what that means? You know, like when someone says like it's like a meta issue, it's like not about like the issue itself, but it's about like taking a step back, like one level higher, looking down, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And likewise, when we think about like metaphysical things, it's like, okay, well, we see this, but then like, what's really going on here? What's this really about? Like, if we change our perspective, what is like this really about? What can we see from another angle, from this essentially greater angle?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think too much about like metaphysics in the sense of like the okay, what is the nature of time?
Mm-hmm.
Ironic. That's actually ironic because I actually do think about that a decent amount. In the sense of that, like, okay, so if God knows the future and like, well, we think that God, there's the idea that God knows the future and what's going to happen and all of that, which is how he's able to like prophesize. He knows what people ultimately end up doing.
Yeah.
And that leads to like interesting questions and like interesting things because it's like, okay, so if God knows everything and God knows what's ultimately going to happen, and then like how does that affect how he interacts with us? And just questions related to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he knows things, and it's like he can also be very selective in terms of like what he wishes to share with us, how he words things even.
Yeah.
So that's it, very interesting. But in terms of like going back to metaphysics more broadly, I don't venture too much into it, but I use it to sort of like take a step back and see the bigger picture, like what's really going on here. Like the book that I'm reading, the book that I was telling you guys about earlier was, where is it? Oh, The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
It requires like a sort of like, I really like the way that it's written because it's rather simply written, in the sense that I can sell people on like his idea that like it really like he encourages people to take like a sort of meta view in terms of like, okay, so you want these things in your future, you want a career that looks like this, you want your finances to look like this, you want your family and relational life to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
And to get people to take a step back and just sort of thinking about like do this sort of like meta thinking about like their own life in terms of like, are you going that way, are you going heading in the direction so that you end up there,
Mm-hmm.
or are you just sort of like, I want to end up there and then just going off and doing whatever, and hopefully and sort of like relying on the assumption that just sort of like doing whatever somehow leads to good results.
Mm-hmm.
Which it sometimes can if you get lucky, or if you just so happen to luck into doing the right thing. But
Yeah.
that's not really the same as like, that doesn't give you that guarantee or like that assurance of like actually doing what you're supposed to lead to get to where you would like to end up.
Yeah.
So just sort of like, I think that metaphysics is very helpful in that aspect in terms of like it gets you to think about issues from a different angle, but that isn't necessarily metaphysics itself.
Yeah. It's just something that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, metaphysics itself can be quite helpful too. Like, for example, thinking about God, like just thinking about like the metaphysical nature of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is huge.
Yeah.
In terms of like, God is supposedly like us, but at the same time also has very little. There's so many ways in which he is unlike us. In the sense of like, you think about his like divine attributes, the thing about him being a big existent, just the attributes you attribute to God about him being infinite,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of like eternal, just
Mm-hmm.
sort of like these big concepts. And yeah, like thinking about like what it means for him to have created everything, and also like God's nature of being perfectly good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? How does that affect things?
Yeah.
And then you end up in metaphysical things, like for example the metaphysics of sin. How does that work? How does sin's corrupting power work, and how do we see that in like the way in like the different things we see in the world?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it can be very helpful to have that angle because it explains a lot. Like, for example, why do people who did good and like do all the right things end up in like tragic situations?
Yeah.
And it just sort of like explains that, like, in like, for example, the idea of like the metaphysics of sin and how it can corrupt and break and distort, and how people don't always get, and how even justice in terms of like you get what you deserve, that is also distorted somewhat, where people who do well suffer and people who do evil prosper. Like that sort of like distortion.
Yeah.
It can sort of help. It helps me make sense of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So having that sort of like metaphysical perspective is very helpful.
Yeah.
What was your original question? Because now I'm just talking about like metaphysics.
Oh no, yeah, that's fine. I was gonna ask you more about just like in after you've like defined metaphysics, talking about like just how you've used it in your life, which you have answered, and I guess just more so, a little bit more so. Actually, I guess you've answered it. Is like how you've been thinking about God with it, how that's helped you in thinking about God and stuff like that. Yeah, I actually wasn't too sure where I wanted to go with that. It was just something that
Yeah.
I've been thinking about, and just it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some questions that now some questions are coming to mind.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm not sure if what is the purpose of life, if like of like what you're supposed to do in life. I'm not sure if I would classify that into metaphysics or something else.
Mm.
But in the sense of like, well, what is, so we exist,
Yes.
like we're born and then we just sort of like become aware of our existence.
Yeah.
And then we eventually die. So it's like, I'm not quite sure if I would classify that as a metaphysical question or something else. I mean, something more existential. But there's other aspects, like, for example, I have one example, but it's like, I feel like I talk about this all the time because that's
Yeah.
what I studied in my psychology, but I studied a lot of relational psychology and just sort of like, okay, there's a lot here.
Yeah.
There's sort of like metaphysics about relationships in terms of like dynamics between two people, that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
So that's like, that's not what we study in psychology, but just sort of like applying that, and then also like trying to also understand metaphysically how relationships work, and then apply, like, for example, the empirical wisdom of like scientists and psychologists and researchers and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then also like making use of like the biblical understanding of like what relationships are, how they operate, how God designed them to work, how they're distorted by sin. Just sort of like making use of that sort of like understanding from God and like from the Bible as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like, for example, I seriously can't think of anything else. I'm just sort of like, this feels very cliche for me, but I'm like, I always think about this question because, like, well, it is a big question, but like, let's think about, okay, so how do I approach this?
Yeah.
So, in the beginning,
Yes.
God created everything and like the universe and the people, and then like the earth, and then like the little cute animals and all of that, and the ugly animals too for some reason.
For some reason.
I don't know, man. Like, you just look in the ocean and it's just like the deep ocean. And I'm like, I'm not sure if God ever intended us to see this thing.
Yeah, that's debatable.
Yeah, I'm just sort of like, why?
Why?
And then it's like, okay, if some animals created, I don't know. There's something. That's not what I'm thinking about.
Okay.
But just sort of like how God created people.
Mm-hmm.
And just sort of like the metaphysics of people, not just sort of like how do I word this? The metaphysics of people's soul, so to speak. Like, what exactly is a person? Like, when God created people, what exactly is people? Like, what did God want to create with them?
Mm-hmm.
Just of like, okay, God would like to interact and have a relationship between him and his people. Like, what metaphysically, what is the nature of that relationship? How is it supposed to work? What are people supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, what are people right now?
Mm. Yeah.
and then it just sort of that leads into.
Oh. Okay, we have some slight technical issues at the moment. Connection was lost. Let's try this again. There we go. Are we back?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was weird. Don't know what happened there.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Well,
I actually hit my back to the computer and just was like thinking about things and like looking at my posters.
okay.
Like try and think about this. Also, I'm gonna get some water and think about metaphysics on the way there. Like what I'm gonna say.
Okay, sounds good.
I am thirsty.
Yes. Is this an intermission? I guess this is an intermission. Alright, run intermission. Here we go. Alright, we're back from intermission, essentially. Yeah. What were we talking about before?
Metaphysics.
Yes. I think you were in the middle of something before we got cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a lot about the ideas about like thinking about something metaphysically.
Yeah.
Like metaphysically, like let's look at creation. Okay,
Yeah.
God created the universe and everything in it.
Uh-huh.
So why? And also like what is the purpose of all these things? Like what is the purpose of all the animals?
Uh-huh.
What is the purpose? And then he created man and women.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what is the purpose of people? Like what are people? And out of that, you will like metaphysically, like when you like think about something like what is this thing?
Uh-huh.
Like what is a person?
Uh-huh.
Or like what is like the think of like an invention. Like what is an invention? Like what is like if someone invents something, part of the thing about like what it is also like its purpose.
Yeah.
This is probably like a philosophical debate about like whether or not purpose falls into something what something is metaphysically, but we'll set that aside. We'll just assume that it is. That's a part of it. Like for example, let me find something that's created. Oh, I found my Switch. So, yes. So like I have it in my hand and I'm just sort of like, okay, what is this?
Okay. Ah, yes.
And it's like, it's a Nintendo Switch, and like heavily related to it is like, well, what is its purpose? Oh, I found my phone. That's even better. Let's use it because like when you think about it, phone.
Yes.
This is like the Sunday school thing we had with Mr. Bob, and he was like, and I just sort of, like didn't know what to say, so I just said yes.
Yes.
But yes, let's think about this.
Yeah. Okay.
Phone. Like just even think about it. We call it a phone, but how
Mhm.
many times have we like? How often do we actually call people using these things?
Mm-hmm.
We call it a phone, and yet we don't. It's sort of like its purpose has changed over time. Like when you say "I need my phone," and it's like, and like, why are phones so important? It's not because like to call people. Like I can't even remember the last time I called someone with mine.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
not even like texting necessarily, but just sort of like having access to like the internet.
Uh-huh.
So or like being able to like call people. Well, no, not call people, but just sort of like check your Instagram, check your Facebook, just sort of like be able to be so that people can contact you, message you, check your texts or like your instant messages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's also like other things, like for example, using it as like a GPS, a thing you order food off of, all these like apps now that you can do various things with. Like for example, watch Netflix, play mobile games like Candy Crush or what? Do people still play that? I don't know.
I do not know.
I don't know.
Anyways.
But yeah, just sort of like the metaphysics of like a thing, and like where purpose falls into that. So in terms of like a mobile phone, like phone originally started as like a cell phone, so then that way you can contact people in case of emergencies. I'm just thinking, like, what did people used to do before this? Did they just die, or like? It's like that meme. Guess I'll just die.
I guess I'll just die.
But yeah, yeah. So where does purpose fall into this? Into like the metaphysical nature of a thing. Like for example, what is the metaphysical nature of people? What is the metaphysical nature of a man? What is the metaphysical nature of a woman? As you can tell, this will get very. Oh my gosh. Actually, technically, I should be using the culturally, there's also the trying to figure out, like for example, the terms man, woman, male, female. Do those necessarily correspond to each other? Do they not? There's a metaphysical question about like that.
Yeah.
What is a man versus what is a male? What is it? There's like a metaphysical thing about that, like that sort of thing. What is something fundamentally?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like, you got to be careful with this at a certain point. Like at this, like in this area, you got to be like careful about like what you say about this.
Yeah.
And also like you got to be and also checking your assumptions about this very charged issue.
Yeah.
It's like, because it's something that like that's like such a big component of our lives. It's just sort of like this idea about like thinking about like the way that a parent raises a child, whether or not they're a boy or a girl, and just sort of like the way that like when they're born, parents see their sex, and then from there they decide what color clothing to have, what toys they play with, who they interact with, how they're social. A lot of like socialization. It's just sort of like metaphysically, are they supposed to be socialized this way, or is like what is cultural, what is like the fundamental essence of like what a male human child is versus like the socialized things added onto it, and just sort of like pulling these apart, trying to isolate something's fundamental essence from sort of like all of the other things that have been put onto it. That is a very interesting and very complicated thing to do. But yeah, so like metaphysically, like what is man, what is woman, are they supposed to have certain roles, that sort of thing, that like I think it's like federal headship is the term that you use.
Yes.
You mentioned that, and just yes, I remember, I paid attention.
Thank you for that, for paying attention.
Just sort of like, and there's like a lot of, because that sort of thing, that is like a metaphysical idea in itself, that like there are it, because the idea assert, I don't know if I want to use that term, but the idea is that like that idea, the idea behind federal headship is that there is that, in terms of the question like are there specific roles for men and women, that federal headship, the idea says yes, and that's sort of like that's the sort of like metaphysical question and things that you get when you think about metaphysics. So it's sort of like the underlying the fundamental purpose of things, like that sort of like big question. This is the thing that I wanted to find another example for, but thankfully I found already listed other examples, so I can go into this one. Like for example, how do I put this? So you know how like in church culture, it's just sort of like, all right, how does sex ed in church culture usually go? It's like, okay, that's for marriage, don't have it until then. And it's like innately in that, it's this sort of like metaphysical idea. I'm gonna use the term assumption here, and like what that means is that essentially assumption is just sort of like, assumption is a charged word, but it's not necessarily like the way that philosophers use it is very different from the way that it's used in like contemporary
Mm-hmm.
culture, because like the terms assumption, argument, those have like negative connotations in like outside of philosophy, whereas like in philosophy they're just sort of like neutral terms that are used to like an assumption is just sort of like an idea you already have, and it's like
Yeah.
trying to like step back from that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not, it doesn't have the terms assumption and argument don't have the same charged and negative connotation that they do in contemporary language, I
Okay.
guess. But yeah, going back to the sex thing, it's just sort of like that is fundamentally like the don't have sex until you're married. That is fundamentally a metaphysical idea that is being asserted. Is that like you need to, because like metaphysically, sex is for marriage,
Yeah.
and that is like that is a very fundamental part of like Christian theology. Well, yes, no.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where
I
we're
think I
making
tra-
these truth claims that some people might not agree with. But I would say so.
Well,
Yeah,
I would
so.
say actually. Let me adjust. I think that like when you look at like the biblical, the way that Jesus and the rest of the Bible talk about sex, it is to be God would like it in marriage, and
Yes,
that is it.
I would agree.
I think it's very difficult to argue otherwise.
Hmm.
Like people can argue like all sorts of like difficult, all sorts of like things with like scriptures, but like some things are definitely more hard, are like harder to justify than others. Like there's probably like people that can come up with all sorts of like loopholes. Well, various loopholes, but like
Yes.
underlying that idea that like belief within the church is that you're not supposed to have sex until after you're married. That is like a metaphysical claim because like it asserts something that like the metaphysics about sex and that it's supposed to be like between two people married and like the metaphysics of like marriage and just sort of like that union and what it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
Uh, I was watching a sermon series by Matt Chandler called the Mingling of Souls. Yes, I think that's what it was. And just it was very interesting to see because like it's a very long series with like 15 sessions and like but I was very impressed because I just sort of got to see this sort of like metaphysics of like he painted this sort of like metaphysical picture in terms of like what marriage is supposed to be, like what how it's supposed to represent and point to and glorify God through it, through that union, and like where sex falls in between there, and just like think about sex in the sense that like people are naked, and it's just sort of like that nakedness represents vulnerability and like intimacy and like all these things, and just sort of like that, all these like assumptions about well no all these beliefs about like what things are like what men are, what women are, what relationships are, what marriages, what sexes, what children are, all of these things are like more bigger metaphysical things in terms of like what a thing actually is, and then from there, at least in my belief, what it's supposed to be,
Hmm.
what something is, and what it's supposed to be. Which is not what you normally think about when you think about when it comes to like the physical, so to speak, like the everyday sort of like interaction. And so it's like, well, why do you get married in the physical thing? Well,
Yeah.
tax benefits and other things.
Yeah.
And then you get to like, and like, well, why do you? Well, what does it mean to move in together?
Yeah.
Like, metaphysically, like, what does that say?
Mm.
Versus like practically, you get what you don't have to pay as much rent,
Yeah.
and someone else is there to do the dishes when you don't want to. And then you split up cooking, so you don't have to do it all. Like these like practical everyday things
Yeah. Yeah.
that is separate from like the big grand. What is it? What is this really? What is it really supposed to be? Metaphysical stuff.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying here. Yeah.
Yeah, I just got the analogy of like sort of like the Earth versus the heavens.
Oh.
I don't know how deep that is, but like the like everyday stuff, and then there's like the big heavenly transcendent, ultimate bigger thing out there.
Yeah. Hmm.
There's other metaphysical things too. Like you can just, I feel like I'm just putting like the metaphysics of blank, and then you just put whatever in there, and then you get like your own like thing to think about.
Hmm.
Like the metaphysics of worship, the metaphysics like for example, what is worship?
Hmm.
Why does God like it? like what do like there's a lot of I think it would be very interesting to ask someone who does worship and like works and does a lot of that. Like for me, I don't think I can sing, so I don't do any of that. Well, actually, or do I?
Ah.
What does it?
Ah.
Because it's like
Lee.
when I think it's like okay, worship. Like when I just like the first thing that comes to mind is like church, is in the church, singing and making music to glorify God.
Uh-huh.
It's like okay, that's like the first thing. But like, is that all worship is, or are there other avenues of worship? Like for example, like the Psalms, are those not worship? Even if they're not necessarily like, even if like, I don't know how musical all of those were, but suppose that like David wrote like a psalm with like no musical content or anything like or singing or anything like that, just
Uh-huh.
like a psalm, a poem. Like, is that not worship?
Mm.
And then there's also the idea that gets floated around every once in a while, like work as worship, like how that, what is worship fundamentally?
Yeah.
Like, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of like when something's quite just a little bit out of your reach.
Yeah.
That's how I feel right now, grasping metaphysics. It's like I can see something, I'm trying to get at it. I can get some of it, but not quite. It's like when you're short and you're trying to reach something on the top shelf.
Okay.
No offense to anyone who's short who's listening to this, but just that's what I thought about. My brother is taller than me, so he can go reach for things.
Yeah.
And he also sees how dirty the top of the fridge is.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is just what I think about. Like, I think like half of it is like deep stuff, and half of it is just sort of like just things that come out.
That's fine. That's fine. So there was something you mentioned earlier that I do want to touch upon a bit more, and that was how you mentioned assumptions.
Yes.
As someone who has, knowledge of the Bible and of truth of these concepts that we talk about and we claim to be true, what would you say are some important things that we should be careful of or recognize when we are making assumptions in regards to Christianity or in regards to this kind of belief-based system at all?
So careful assumptions about Christianity and belief and faith and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that like one of the fundamental things that like my degree did well in terms of drilling into me was just sort of like when you come to like trying to uncover your own assumptions about a thing.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like when you try and break apart like your thinking, and you end up at this sort of like, okay, well, why do I think this? I think this because I think A because of B, or like B because of A, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to like step back and look at your own thinking in terms of like, okay, I think this because of this and this, but the things that I thought that like, I think C because of A and B.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like A and B, I think that A and B are like this, but are they really? Or am I just assuming that? What is my background? What is my justification? What is my evidence
Yeah.
for thinking that A and B are the way that they are? And then, which then justifies me building on top of using them to go to C.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of like this thinking about something in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when I read the Bible, I'm just sort of like I always like feel like part of the problem, one of the things that my degree has caused is that I was just sort of like this lack of certainty when it comes to like everything.
Yeah.
This sounds terrible, but it's like it's not that bad. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, it sounds funny because it's just sort of like, oh yeah, lack of certainty. You're just sort of like gazing into the abyss. It's like, hey, it's fine. You get used to it. It's kind of cool. There's some stars and stuff in there, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just how do you know? Like when I'm like reading the Bible, I'm just sort of like, okay, I think that the verse says this, but I'm like, okay, how do I know that I understand that? Do I actually know what this, like the content? Do I understand the context? Do I understand everything else in this verse? Because like I can look at the words, put them together, and then sort of like see what all those words mean together,
Mm-hmm.
and like the linguistical structure or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the right term. I don't know,
Yeah.
but and then there's also other things where you like read between the lines. But then there's like other things that sort of like feel even deeper in the sense of that like the what is the idea that is being tried? What is like one of the idea? There's another question. Do all the verses like is there only one meaning for it like like only one true interpretation, one true meaning, one idea that is that every verse is trying to communicate, or can there be multiple? Can the word be used in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
in different times, valid without being invalid? Like can it is the word flexible in that flexible? There's a careful word that you have to be like very careful in terms of like what words you use.
Yeah.
There's a lot there,
Yeah.
and just like yeah, that sort of question.
Mm. Mm.
So I don't even remember where it was, but I was talking about the word and yes, understanding the context, seeing if we're, all of this was fundamentally about assumptions and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm torn between because I'm just sort of like, should I do my because like when you think about a belief system, like let's think about like religions, like the different ones. Like for example, we have Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, religion is also a charged term, but like
Yeah,
everything's
it
a charged
is.
terms. So faith, belief, all of that, and it's just sort of like assumptions about them. Okay, I'll begin with like let's pick something that we don't. Well, let's pick something different because it's like for example, Judaism or like
Judaism. Yeah.
Islam, and just
Yeah.
because like those I don't know, like I know a little bit about them, but not much. So like it's a good example in terms of like assumptions. And it's just sort of like, well, I think that they think this, but I'm not really sure. And like I have also seen like I think that like they believe certain things because like they act certain ways, they do certain things, they have certain important practices that they need to do,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of like there's like sort of like that and that sort of like makes up my initial understanding or like assumption in terms of like what I think that they believe.
Yeah.
Whereas like if I like actually believe that those believed in those faiths and like actually practiced or like had some background or more experience and knowledge, in terms of like my assumptions about the belief would be very different.
Mm-hmm.
Does this make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now when we apply it to our own beliefs and practices, this is like the internal reflection thing again.
Yeah.
In terms of like, okay, I think of the way that this requires a big understanding of just sort of like a way to like think about, take a step back in terms of like think about your own relationship. I don't want to say relationship with God, but just sort of like when you say that you're a Christian or that you follow Jesus and that you have a relationship with God, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah.
What are your assumptions in terms of like what that's supposed to mean and like what you're supposed to do with that? Like how you're supposed to behave.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like, all right, go to church on Sunday, read the Bible. I actually wonder how many Christians actually read the Bible, but that is
Ooh.
like,
Ooh. That's beyond the charged question. I would say that's. Ooh.
man. All right, so
Anyways, yeah. Go on.
there's a there's a there used to be a site called Cardcast where you could make individual like cards for like a game called Card Against Humanity.
Ah, yes.
I know where I swear I'm going somewhere with this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. But just sort of like one of the things that like one of the custom cards that I've seen before was like believing in a book you haven't read, and I'm just sort of like, oh wow. But yeah, like
Believing
that's
in
a
a
big
book you haven't read.
yeah, because it's like okay, like think about the way like the altar call and like all that. It's like, okay, you're not a Christian, but like think about it. Like some of us haven't even read like the full Bible yet. I'm not necessarily saying that like a verse in like Second Chronicles is going to be super important and we should always know that in life. But like just thinking about like if Christians value the Bible to be so that highly and like we truly believe it is this document, this essentially metaphysical document from God, like not just like a human, a document that like is a collection of like human words and ideas, but there's actually some like divine spiritual nature in this document from God, and it's like we should at least read the whole thing at some point.
Yeah.
Like at least read the whole thing. It's like I believe in this, and you haven't even read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's something else. But yeah, like just thinking about like, well, what is the Christian life supposed to be? Like in all the assumptions, because there's a lot of assumptions in terms of like, okay, I'm a Christian, therefore I should be doing this.
Yes.
And there's like a lot of things. It's like a lot of the stuff is just not necessarily like bad, but it's just sort of like there's a lot of things that we just do certain ways. Like it would be very interesting to go, like to leave our culture and to go like visit a church somewhere else in terms of not just like another church, but like, oh, this church in this city does it this way. Another church in this city also does this thing differently. They do worship this way. They take communion at this time instead of that time, you know, that sort of thing. And then versus like you go like to another culture, like for example Africa, and like you go to a church there, and it's like, how does being a Christian and like doing church, how is that different from different times and cultures and all of that? And it's like a lot of like there's a lot of ways that we do things, and it's like, well, why do we do it this way? And sometimes it's not. It's like, okay, well, we're trying to do this spiritual discipline of like worship or like preaching, teaching the word, and it's just sort of like, well, this is how it comes out in our culture, in our time. Like for example, the way Sunday school is taught right now.
Yeah.
Like, when I taught Sunday school before, there was a lot of. It was like very simple, but it's like try to get the key message across. Like for example, like think about it. Like think about when it comes to like raising up your kids in the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, not your kids because we don't have any yet. Or do we have them? But they're only in the future metaphysically.
Ooh,
There's a big question there.
Sean!
This is like very interesting because like when you think about like time and then you think about God, because God somehow sees the whole thing. I had this. I wrote a paper that like how I think what I think that I think that like life is sort of like a movie in the sense that like God sees the whole thing and can skip around like you can skip around in OBS or whatever you use to edit videos.
Yes.
Where it's like we're just like in the thing and like life is just playing out and like it's playing.
Yeah.
And like we're moving through time, and then God somehow sees the future and like sees where we were and then where we are and where we're going to be, and then it leads to like a lot of complicated questions about like where exactly, how does that, and that God is somehow outside of all of this.
Yes.
And it's just yeah, it becomes like very complicated to like try to think about. But yeah, but yes. So like when it comes to like okay, teaching the kids that we have been entrusted to teach.
Yes.
Okay, like just thinking about like the way that you teach them, knowing that like, okay, their attention span is not very long, and like how do you get them like the practical things like, okay, you shouldn't hit each other. Yeah, just things like that. You got to start with the basics for them, and then like Paul talks about like solid food in that analogy, that analogy of like your relationship as a Christian with God. Okay, that was a jumble of words, but your Christian walk, your relationship with God, that sort of thing, and just sort of like maturity and what that means from like the whole initial excitement about being of salvation, and then how that evolves and changes over time as one matures.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. And there's just sort of like a lot of assumptions that we have in terms of like, this is what church is supposed to be. This is what being a Christian means. This is what we're supposed to be doing. because like that's what we've been taught and like that's what we've seen modeled.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's just sort of like, is what we see and what like the way that we do things, is that necessarily how they're supposed to be done?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that just like sometimes a way that we just sort of like, okay, how do we worship God? Like how like the logistics of like, okay, how are we gonna practically like get everyone in the church to worship God? Let's sing a song and then like, yeah,
Yeah.
just things like that. In terms of like, okay, are we restricted to certain things?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that just popped into my mind was just sort of like the spiritual pathways thing, I think it's called, but just sort of like, how do you interact best with God? Like what brings you close, how do you feel close to God? And like, what gets you to reflect and like really gets you and your personality and your spirit close to God, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like, for some people, they like to go out in the woods and like think about things. For other people, they like to listen to music and like worship him and like, yeah, just sort of like, what does it look like? For other people, it's reading the word, and like these are all different aspects, but just obviously like, yeah, there's other things like, for example, reading the word. That's a very core component for anyone.
Yeah.
And then we have other things like, for example, appreciating creation.
Yeah.
And then like worship, what does that look like for different people? Like, what is the best? Like, for example, okay, we're all called to worship, but like, what does that look like? For some people, it might not be singing, because some people like me cannot sing. So, what does that look like for some of us?
Yeah.
And like, how do you like sort of like, how do people worship God like in different ways?
Mm-hmm.
In the ways that like they interact. Like, for example, people interact with other people different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, my personality is a certain way, your personality is a certain way. It's just sort of like how we interact with each other and how we interact with God is different, in the sense that like we should be doing the same fundamental things that God wants us to, but in terms of like, what do they look like? It's not necessarily the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense? I feel like I've been talking for a while.
You've talked about a lot, and I feel like I haven't retained a bunch of it, but yeah, no, it's been good so far.
Great.
Yeah, no, I feel like I might have had things to say about some of the things you've mentioned, but now I don't remember. Talking is good, Sean. Don't
Yes.
feel bad for it. This is a
Yes.
lot of good stuff, and I feel like if I like once I get this out and like I listen back to it, I'll have a good idea of just like everything, and I can take my time with just like, you know, formulating responses and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm painting different things.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just sort of like painting things, but I also realize this is why philosophers like to write, because like you write that idea, you get that idea out,
Yeah.
and then it's like, okay,
Exactly.
I don't like the way this is written. They're like, I don't think this really conveys what I was trying to think. So just trying to like, just know that like there's some things that I'm like, I say it and I'm like, no, I should change it that way. I should say that differently. So yeah, I have that idea, but like I meant that, but it actually comes up as that. So I should change that. So like, just know that it's like, no, this is not like the painting upon like the Sistine Chapel or anything like that. It's just sort of like this is like sketches. I'm like, okay, this is this dude, and then like I draw a stick figure here, and like it looks sort of like this. It's like, no, and then you like edit it, and then eventually you come up with the finished product.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. And I'm painting all sorts of different directions. So like I'll like say something, and then there's like this tangent. You could open up this, like, you know, like I'm one of those people where like when you talk about a thing, it just opens up, and then there's like the whole bunch of branches that of like different tangents and things that you can talk about. And you just end up picking one, and then you go down, and then you pick another, and then like you end up like this large decision tree essentially.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Like, don't worry, I understand. I think like that too.
Yeah.
When I am deeply immersed in thought, it's just like, if something interesting pops up, I'll go down that path, explore it. I might not even come back to the original thing I was thinking about, and just more and more paths just open. I was just like, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
Mm.
But yeah. I'm just trying to grasp at something that you said before, because I know I had some responses, or I had some more questions that I wanted to bring forth, but now I don't.
May the Lord bring it back to your mind. That's just how I'm gonna see grass from now on. I'm trying to grasp with this idea, and I'm just gonna think about like trying to reach the cookie jar on the top shelf.
Yeah. So, Sean, how did you come to your conclusions in regards to the faith as a thinker, as someone who mulls through kind of like the issues, the nitty gritty, and all of that stuff? What were some of the key things that you thought of, and the moments that kind of helped you to route your thinking, if you will?
What makes you think I've concluded anything?
Well, fair point, I guess. But you must have some conclusions, or at least some process that has brought you to where you are now, right?
Yeah, it's just sort of like you kind of keep working at it, and then like you refine it a bit more, and you refine it a bit more, and then you use something in the meantime, and while you're using it, you're refining it and try to get better at it.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just sort of like, I don't know, man. Like people ask me, like, why do you think like that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just like, well, part of it is also just sort of like, this is the kind of person that God has made me, but then also like using that, like taking advantage of that, and just sort of like taking advantage of time, and just sort of like, okay, I recognize these times are like when I'm best suited to thinking.
Yeah.
So like set aside time and think then. Just sort of like take some time, reflect, just sort of like don't be distracted by anything, just sit there and think about things.
Mm-hmm.
And see where you end up, see where your ideas lead you.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of like how I conclude that, it's just sort of like you like look at a bunch of different things, and then you see what stands out, and then you like use that. You just sort of like put it all together, mix it all up, and then you get something. And then you just continue to work with that, like to continue to mold and sculpt it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does.
Ideas are like clay. You keep molding them.
Yeah. And I think I relate to that because the process by which I design is the same, right? Designers are taught to iterate, and the process, the entire process is iterative. You have to continuously go back to it, work at it, refine it, while taking what you have and also just recognizing that, this is just part of the process. This is just in getting somewhere, you have to continue to work at this one thing, whether it just be troubleshooting, in a sense, if you will, or just like taking what's there, trying to improve it, trying to refine it, kind of thing. Yes, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
One
thing I should ask you is, what is design?
Oh no.
I like asking like the people in C at this.
No. Who else have you asked this?
I've asked John this before, and it's just sort of like,
did he give you an answer?
Yeah, it's just sort of like it was like the like kind of like mind-blowing type thing where it was like difficult to articulate.
Yeah.
But then he like even talked about like this like design and everything. Well, he said more. So I don't remember exactly everything that he said. Oh, like next time I meet with him, I'll just ask and like about that on him.
Yeah.
And he's like, one of the things was just sort of like, I remember him talking about this cup, like this design in this cup, and like how it's held, how it stacks with each other.
Yeah.
The design that it wants to show, like in the restaurant we were eating, like the design of like the interior space, and like what's that, the psychological elements in there, something like like for example, you hear the way that people design want their houses to be designed, the design of buildings now, and just sort of like there's like a lot there.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get all of it, so yeah. And it would be interesting to hear what you have to say about what design is.
Yeah,
that's a huge topic though, because it's like this is what I do with my life.
Such a big topic, especially with design being, to a lot of people, like very subjective. It's a personal opinion and stuff like that. So here's the thing. I first really encountered this question when I took one of my first third-year classes. And this was the opening lecture. This was the opening statement from the professor. He asked the entire class. We were seated in a boardroom. It was nice, fancy. The sun was bright. Big windows at the back of the classroom. And he just threw this question at us. Guys, what is design? Who are designers? What are they? No one had an answer. And I was like, shoot, I should probably try and say something, you know? It's like, And I
It's like, you know, that sort of like, okay, I have an idea, but like, how do I know that this is really the right answer? Because, like, you know, it's like such a big thing, you know?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that everyone thinks through these things and tries to come up with an answer, even if it is a personal answer. So I thought about it for a while, and actually I ended up dropping that class because of workload issues.
Oh.
But the answer I can currently give you is, in a word, I would say design is purpose or intention. To elaborate on that a little bit more, I'm going to move my answer away from how people generally think of design in terms of like artistic value, aesthetics, looks. And I'm going to say that design is the process that is part of creating something where the people that are creating it have to think through everything and give it a purpose and a reason. In short, when you are making something, everything is intentional. To me, that is design. It's this process where you consider things and think, what is the point of this? How do I make this better? How do I take something and make something out of this kind of thing? So let's talk about a cup. Like, let's talk about a mug. Okay. It is a cup with a handle.
Yes.
In the simplest terms, it is a cup with a handle. What is the point of this cup? Well, the point of this cup is that so it can hold liquid, and it can hold liquid that can be changed to your preference, hot or cold, and there's no limits to what specific liquid it can hold. Right? The material is chosen so that it can withstand heat and cold, and that if you choose to heat something up or choose to cool it down, this is a material that can withstand that. And then the point of a handle is to hold it, to give you something easier, something ergonomic, that you can handle this cup in a way that's comfortable and it involves less effort. It's more effortless, right? It's the area in which you are touching the mug when you're holding the handle is a lot less than when you grasp a cup with the entire palm of your hand and your fingers, right?
Yes. Firmly grasp it.
Firmly grasp it.
I'm sorry, that probably was not helpful because it
No,
just
that was great. Bro, we're just talking. Anything goes.
That's okay, because like sometimes I was like, you know, there's like plenty of times when we're like talking about things, like deep things, and I'm just sort of like, you know what would be funny? This, and I just say it, and then it throws them off.
Bro, that's that's just comedy, dude. Comedy
good.
gold. Comedy gold.
Yes.
Firmly grasp it. No, gosh. Anyways.
You didn't grasp that net properly.
No.
But yes, talk about the mug.
I mean, that's really all there is to say about the mug, right? And that's why I think, you know, people think about designing things, but they don't really think about designing systems. They don't really think about designing hierarchies, designing order, because rules are designed, laws are designed, you know, institutions are designed. All of those things which people had to take time to think through and to finalize as this is good, this is what we're going to implement. And then if there's something wrong, they come and adjust it. To me, all of that is design. It's intention. Right? So, one of the more interesting things that you know what, I have to remember because this happened a while ago. But we designed systems. We designed not just physical things, but concepts that people follow, including rule sets, including you know, things like if we have one thing, how does this one thing interact with another thing to create another thing, right? It's not just the individual things that we design, but the entire individual units creating a whole new thing. Yeah. I really wish I could say that I've had experience designing like more conceptual things, but I haven't. And that's okay, I guess. But yeah, it would be really interesting to have more experience designing stuff like rules, like games. And another example, by the way, is programs. Designing programs, right? If we have a summer camp, we have to look at who is it for, what do we have to consider because of that, and then from that, we can think about, what do we want to spend time doing? What do we want to allow, not allow, stuff like that. Right?
Yeah.
I'm essentially going in circles at this point. Intention is the main thing that I want to get at here. As long as you put thought into creating something, there is intention. Then that is design. I take what I've learned and how I've thought about this. This is my philosophy on design. And I look at the natural world around us, and I say that I can see God's hand in designing things because everything is filled with intention. If I can see something that is there by intention with a purpose, then to me that's more proof of the existence of a creator, the existence that someone put these things here for in this way for a certain purpose, certain usage even. Sean, were you there when I presented at YAM the design thing, the design talk?
Yeah.
You
and
were?
then you had us do the thing and fold up the paper and draw things on it.
Ah, yes, that was that was odd. That was only odd. Do you remember the slide with the banana?
Ah, yes, the banana.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
that's one of those things where if you look at a banana, right? Or any fruit for that matter, for this first point, you can tell some of its qualities, some of its characteristics by looking at its color.
It's yellow.
Yeah. And if it's not yellow, then something happened to it. If it's green, it's probably less ripe. If it's completely brown and blackened, you're like, oh, that's not good. It's probably overripe and mushy on the inside. And if it's blue or red, you could be like, oh, that's a different kind of banana. It has a different taste. And if it's blue, I feel like that's just not normal.
What is this?
Yeah. Red bananas I've had before, and those are good. But anyways.
Wait, they have red bananas?
There are red bananas. They taste interesting. Anyways, the main point of a banana is it has distinct lines on it that when you peel open the banana, more or less naturally the banana follows the curvature and it follows those ridges to create the shape of the peel, right? It's almost as if part of this fruit was designed to be eaten in this way by us. And then there's the other aspect of the I don't know what that thing, the stem on top of the banana makes it easier to peel. And almost it's just telling us, peel me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we call that kind of thing, where if you look at something, you can kind of tell what you can do with it. We call that an affordance. How do we learn? At one point in our life do we learn to grab things? We learn it naturally because when we're children, we look at toys, we look at things, and we're just I want it, I grab it, I touch it, We don't need to be taught these things. We do them simply because we recognize that is what we can do with them. And part of design is taking a look at this cognitive process, how humans perceive things, and figuring out, what is the easiest way or the most intuitive way to get someone to do this thing, and by extension, how can we make life better or improve the quality of life through the things we create, through the things that we design. Yeah. I like design because a lot of times in studying this, I see how the hand of God, I see how God has, done a lot of things, and I've just learned a lot about him, and just in review and concept as well. So yeah, that's why I'm in this program now. Still am. But yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question or not.
It does.
Okay.
A bit. But it's like one of those nebulous things that's hard to explain fully.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I had something on my mind. Now I've forgotten. Dang it! Why must this happen? Yeah. What are your thoughts at the moment?
I do not have thoughts.
That sounds very strange. You realize that?
What?
I do not have thoughts. I do not think.
Take that, Descartes.
Oh, gosh.
Sometimes I'm thinking, and other times I just don't have anything to think. I'm just sort of like, other times I'm just sort of like, it's like when I was on the beach a few years ago. I was there with my church small group, and we're just sitting there. It was before fireworks, one kid's beach. And we're just there, and I'm just like, laying on the blanket, looking up. I'm just sort of like, this is a nice day. Just savoring the moment.
Mm.
And that was it. I had nothing to think about.
I mean, yeah. Just enjoy things as they are. Yeah.
Yes.
Those moments are nice,
Yeah.
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 I need to remember to start keeping track of how long we have these conversations for.
Oh, why?
Nah, just so like, how long have we been talking for? How long have we been talking about one thing for? Just to keep track of things.
Ah.
Yeah.
I don't have anything I'm not thinking about anything.
I'm still trying to figure out what I was thinking about earlier.
Okay.
I don't like forgetting things and then just being like, whatever, let it go. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I know. Because it's like, I was thinking about something, and then, like, I need to write it down, and if you don't, it's like, what was I thinking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Writing things down. I completely agree with you on that. Whenever, like I have a profound thought or ideas or whatever, even just drawing them, like just getting them down and on paper,
Yeah.
That's super important to me. But yeah. I was once taught at a training session for a camp that I was a counselor for. That, if during this training session it's going to be short, brief, we're going to talk about certain things action-wise. But we are not allowed to write notes. You're not allowed to take notes. Everything you do, I want you focused on what I'm going to say, what we're going to be talking, the discussions, because this is an important thing that you should not need to reference, that you should just commit to memory. And at the time, I thought that that was good. But then I realized my brain has limited memory capacity.
Yeah. If I was in that situation, I'd just be like, all right, well, this is what I remember, so here you go.
Yeah, I mean, that one time, I did end up remembering, like, a bunch of stuff that was very helpful and very important from that session. I would argue that because of that, I learned a lot just by forcing myself to commit these important concepts to memory. But at the same time, I don't think I can do it all the time. Like, I have to write things down, otherwise I will forget.
Yeah, I have to write things down too.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say, like, during crucial times, these kinds of things, like, it might just be better to commit them to memory immediately because you're going to be practicing them right off the bat. And yeah, stuff like that.
I like to have both because like that way it's like reassurance
Yeah, yeah.
that if anything happens to that idea or you forget or anything,
Mm-hmm.
it's still there.
Yes. That's mainly why I take notes, just to go back on it and reference it. But also if it's something that someone else is saying that I need to review for myself. Not for the sake of making it my own, but for the sake of just referencing. If it's something that I know I need to make mine, like my own knowledge, my own experience, I'll try my best to commit that to memory right there and then. Kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned you taught Sunday school before.
Yes.
What age did you teach? Or what ages did you teach?
Usually upper school age, which for Coastal at the time was grades 3 to 5.
Okay. And how long ago did you teach?
A few years ago.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you consider going back in teaching if you had the opportunity or the chance to?
Oh yes, I've been thinking about that right now.
Oh, really? Nice. Sean, do you think that there should be, needs to be, ought to be, however you want to say it, a qualification to serve?
Yes.
What kind of qualification and why?
Okay, it depends on it depends on where you're doing this.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, first we gotta figure out what does it mean to serve?
Mm-hmm.
In what aspect? Like, in some sense, no, but in some sense, yes. No, in the sense that, like, okay, everyone is supposed to serve, so everyone should be able to do something, have something that they can serve, but not necessarily serve in the sense of that serve other people, but like everyone should be serving God. So,
Mm-hmm.
no, there should be no qualifications on that, and everyone should just do something to get to serve God,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
I think.
But in terms of like serving other people, like serving in the church, yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's like, also depends where. For example, for us, let's see, because like you're representing a church and an organization, and also God, ultimately God, like you're representing God through everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
But then like you're also representing this church, and that like you need to be mindful of that, like you're respectful of that.
Mm-hmm.
You also like know enough to serve in that capacity,
Mm-hmm.
and also have like know when to realize know when to defer, when to say I don't know, or when to say like talk to someone more senior about that, which occasionally happens but not too often.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other like more sensitive areas where there definitely is a threshold you need to be able to meet. One of them is like, for example, with kids ministry, like there's a lot you have to do. Like you have to complete the basic serving things at our church.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to complete like a special training. Then you also have to get like a a document from the police department saying that you have no criminal record or like any criminal record check,
Yeah.
which is makes sense.
Yeah.
So you know you're working with kids.
Yeah.
And then you also have there's other things like, for example, lifestyle commitment, like the worship team and the children's ministry team at Coastal. They have lifestyle commitments that you need to be able to meet.
Yeah. I like that actually.
Yeah.
What are some of the things included in that? Do you know?
Yes and no, sort of.
Okay.
Obviously, there's like the basic things in terms of that. Not doing things that you're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Or that, generally, like Christians, we don't do these things.
Yeah.
So there's like the obvious ones. One of the ones that is actually very interesting to me is that they don't allow they do not want anyone to drink at all.
Oh, really?
Which is very interesting. I didn't know that. But for worship team, I don't think the pastors drink either. But I'm not sure. I don't. Obviously, they probably had like wine or something at some point, but like, I don't think that they do. So that is an interesting requirement.
That is a very interesting requirement.
And it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, what I don't know how I feel about it, because on one hand, it's like, yeah, that makes sense, but on the other hand, it's like, I don't see the harm in it, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, I can understand why. So it's like, that is like something that, and that is also like, that reveals sort of like the how unsure I am, or just sort of like the way that the church views alcohol. It's just sort of like we're not sure what to do with this, because on one hand Jesus drank wine, and like this is, and like in communion he did use wine. You don't need to use wine obviously, but like he did use wine, so like one hand you can't completely prohibit it, but on the other hand it's like for the wrong, like it can definitely lead people astray and really ruin lives if people do not have the ability to handle it. And from that, you also get that is also the reason why a lot of churches generally and like Christians don't drink, because I think there's also like a passage somewhere in the New Testament, one of Paul's letters, where it's like you shouldn't do anything that causes anyone else to stumble. So like if you have, I'm just thinking, so that if you have like you're out with your friends and like you're at like a restaurant and you guys are having drinks, it's like, all right, so should you drink then if you do not know everyone's history and tolerance and just sort of like how well they interact with alcohol? And that's like an interesting question, because on one hand it's like, okay, well, perhaps not, because like you don't want to tempt people.
That one's interesting. I think in looking at that verse about I guess you could say just not causing others to stumble, it also says in the New Testament that if there is something that a Christian believes they should not do, such as eating a certain type of meat, then in their presence, for their sake, do not do that. Like, do not eat that meat, or do not push them to, rather, because if you cause them to like think their thoughts are wrong and cause them to stumble in that regard, guilt trip them, if you will, then you're in the wrong. Right? It's a matter of just like respecting them, and if they'll continue it, let them continue it. It doesn't really affect their faith, right? And if one day they'll change and they come to realize that really at the end of the day it doesn't matter, then good, cool, then you can enjoy it with them then. But it calls for forbearance, it calls for patience on our part, right?
But yeah, I don't know the rest of the content of the lifestyle commitment, but most of it probably makes sense. That is, the alcohol thing stuck out to me because I'm like, that's interesting. Everything else in there probably makes sense. Like, for example, obviously don't do anything that you shouldn't be doing. Like, for example, like live a life that's honoring to God and pleasing to God. Be connected to a small group.
Mm-hmm.
or like be attempting to do so, like, you know, that sort of type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go to church, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that because it calls for more than just I don't want to say lip service, but yeah, that's it. That's what it is, you know? It's like, "Oh, I just need to act righteous. I just need to act good. Whether or not I do good, you know, no one's going to know. That's my private life, and I keep it private. And I think that's a very dangerous way to live as a Christian
Yeah.
because no one is keeping you accountable. And if essentially what you're doing is you're refusing accountability like that,
Yeah.
and it's a no for me, you know.
Oh, I was thinking about this. I was talking with Jan about individualism, because we live in a very individualistic culture, and there's like benefits to that, but there's also like drawbacks in different aspects.
Jan Timoshenko,
Yes.
nice.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that, and like one of the things that came up was just sort of like you're accountable to no one but yourself, which in some senses like can be quite liberating, but on the other hand, it can go south very quickly.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because it's important to be accountable to yourself. Self judgment is, or sorry, not self judgment, self control. My goodness, self judgment. Self control is a fruit of the spirit, and
Yeah.
a very important one. You know.
Yeah. There's also like deeper things involved in this as well.
Yeah, for sure.
When it comes to like serving, like for me, I'm thinking a lot about like, okay, what is motivating me to go to talk to like Pastor Jessica, who's the children's pastor at Coastal,
Mm-hmm.
about like wanting to serve again. I'm like, okay, is that because like I want to, like, what is my intention? And I feel like my intention is not quite right in the sense that like it's not out of like it's something that I feel I should be doing because like everyone else is doing it, which I don't think is quite right in the sense that like is this something God wants me to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that God has called me to do for this season of life? That's what should be motivating to me. Is like, okay, right now, like ask God, should I be doing this? And if He says yes, then yes. If not, then not. Not like that's what. Well, I see other people doing it, and like, well, this sort of like guilt sort of thing. That's like, I don't like that. I don't like the idea because of doing something for the wrong reason.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's because of Kant or something like that. Because like his ideas definitely have influenced me, and there is like the biblical idea about like intention and the heart are very important, which Kant picked up and wrote about in his philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It really drove that home,
Yeah.
and he took that from church.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's intention as well, and just sort of like how do I put this? The state of the heart.
Yeah.
Because like on one hand it's like, yes, serving is like a duty that we're all called to in like different aspects, and it's not necessarily the traditional like serving in the church on like one of the church teams type serving, but like serving in this is more flexible than that. But in terms of like the intention behind that,
Mm-hmm.
the intention matters a lot more than just sort of like the action.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, I'm trying to tie this to what you were saying about like lip service and just sort of like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's not just the whole, okay, can you show up? Can you like do your job as if you're like at work?
Yeah.
It's not like work in the sense that like you go there, you do what you're supposed to do, you're professional, and then in your free time you go get wasted or do whatever you want. It's not like that.
No. Yeah.
And it's just sort of like, I like the lifestyle commitment because it's like, even if there are some things that I'm like not quite sure about, but I'm just sort of like, you know, the like whole standards, like, okay, for our church this is a standard that we want to have. We want the standard of excellence, and this is our requirement if you want to serve with us. We would love for you to serve with us, but like, you gotta make sure you can make all these. I'm not sure if they necessarily ask too much about the heart, but like, I assume that they would want your heart to be in the right place and your intention to be right and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's like, teasing out people's own individual motivations is very difficult to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Like even trying to figure out why you do a certain thing yourself like figuring out your own intentions, that it takes a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely.
did I answer your question?
I guess so.
What was your question?
You know what? I don't really remember either.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, I think when you talk about like serving, motivation for serving, I mean, at the end of the day, you could argue that, through the experience, nothing can really be bad because regardless of motivation, you've gained experience, you've learned things, hopefully. But
Yeah.
I think it is important to realize that there is an important reason is important to consider. Like motivation is important to
Yeah.
consider, especially in a church setting where, you know, like why are you interacting with these kids, or why are you
Yeah.
doing this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought of something that like it's like really, especially with the way that like the church is perceived right now, it's very, and yet the church is like really struggling with it's the way that like outsiders look at it
Yeah.
because of like social and political issues and all of that stuff, and it's probably going to get worse this year as just like it did 4 years ago and since then. But like, yeah, there's like, it's very important that like kids fundamentally be taught real, like especially in kids ministry, that like they learn that like it's not just a thing that you do on Sunday and then you just go off and do whatever.
Yeah.
It's like it's got to be something complete and whole. Like that's fundamental. Like just put aside from like the whole like, oh well, you're just like teaching them and then like playing games and like sort of like babysit, like or at the worst case babysitting while their parents are in the service, because at the younger ages you can't really. It's very like there's not as much teaching and more. There's more what is it, like looking after them while their parents are in the service and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe like they'll play with like, and this is the line that was on Noah's Ark, and like put it like those kind of cute things. But later on, it becomes very important to like realize that it's like Christianity is not just a thing that you do on Sundays,
Yeah.
but it's just sort of like a thing, or like this sort of like mask that you put on, but it's like something that radiates and transforms your entire essence, and that everything that you do conforms to it. Not
Yeah.
not just sort of like this off and on thing. Well, like, yeah, I'm a Christian now, but now I'm not. But it's like that whole. It's a whole life thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's very important for their teachers to embody that, even if it's not necessarily being taught all the time. But it's just important that they have that character about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why we do need to do things like teach at a young age, because these kids they're going to be raised in what I would call like a closed fist environment where the world is going to shove these things at concept wise at them, and it may not necessarily be good stuff.
Yeah, I don't think the world's necessarily always. Well, how do I put this? I don't think that like the world is always has like malicious intent, but rather it's just sort of like, well, this is what they're thinking right now, and it's like, given what they have, I can sort of understand why they come up with certain things, even if I don't necessarily agree with them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do think that when you let the world teach these things, it's very easy, sorry, excuse me, to fall just out of these concepts that are good. They end up
Yeah.
being not good.
Yes.
I feel like there's a better way of saying it, but like
Bad.
the Bible has made it very clear that if you choose to follow the world, you are turning your back on God. And if you let the world dictate what you learn, how you learn, and what shapes you as a person, then that's bad.
So sort of like letting it develop your character
Yeah.
and the inner and like your values and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that a large reason for why I am who I am today is because I've had strong values implanted in me from a young age. And that's good because, you know, if it weren't for that, I'd be in a very different place today. I would not be who I am. And I would probably have a very hard time coming to terms with a bunch of these concepts now.
Yeah.
That my knowledge is solidified, now that my understanding of the world is different, essentially. You know. Yeah. I don't think that this nearly scratches the surface of like the necessity of teaching before, not before anything, I guess just the necessity of teaching children concepts instead of letting them experience it on their own.
Yeah.
Because yeah, there's a very important aspect of they're kids. They need to be fed things. And depending on the things that they are fed, they will develop into a different type of person. You know? Going back to something I mentioned at the very beginning, the teleology, right? The study or the science of purpose, right? We have to ask the question of what is the purpose of this certain action, and at the end of the day, what is the purpose of this purpose, you know? And I think that the purpose of raising a kid with certain values is so that they can become a certain, we can develop their thinking in a certain way. We can train them to recognize things in a certain light so that it becomes easier for them to come to terms with, you know, what we believe is the right thing. And if they really do want to defy that, then that will have to be something that'll be a decision they can make on their own in the future, right?
Yeah.
But establishing a base, establishing a foundation in any project, in anything, in any work is arguably the most important thing. Because without that, you can't build up, and if you try to build up, it will fall down, right?
Yeah.
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 I just had something come to mind. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Given that I was just talking about, like, teaching and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
and teaching and just sort of, like, the importance of character,
Yeah.
and it's also, like, kids learn hypocrite before they even know what the word means.
Do they?
I think that they do, because, like, in the sense that, like, they see their parents say one thing, and then if they do something else, then, like, they already have understood the concept of what, because they're like, but you said this, but you do the opposite, or you don't do that.
Yeah.
Learning
Learning from example.
Yeah.
Or learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of like how important it is, and also the parents, because of, like, how much influence they have and how much time, that they also model Christianity well. That it's not just like for them, it's like they also model it, not just like go to church, take their kids to Sunday school, and then it's like, and then at home it's just sort of like whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that just came to mind in terms of something that's pretty important.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Which is very funny. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what you try to teach, if you cannot live it or demonstrate it in your own life, then you ultimately hold no authority in what you have essentially taught.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me personally in my faith, that was a very big stumbling block in that, I was so focused on the fact that the person or the people who I looked up to, the people who taught me certain things, they lived lives that were very contrary to to what they claimed they believed, to what they claimed they were. And I couldn't get past that for the longest time. I was like, how could this be? And I let that
Yeah.
affect my own faith. But, you know,
Yeah, I did the same too.
yeah. And I think that's something everyone will have to struggle with at some point
Yeah.
in time. And I think the point
Yeah.
of struggling with things is so that we can overcome them and make our results, you know, be strong, so that we can be stronger in our convictions and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. So all's good, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the same thing. Another thing is that, uh, in philosophy, one of the things that we do in like debating is to try and, if you think that someone else's idea is, well, one way that you can show that someone else's idea is wrong and that you shouldn't do it is showing that it leads to a contradiction. Well, like it's sort of like, so like hypocrisy is it's a very strong it's a big weakness, and like, so you want to make sure that your idea doesn't contradict itself, which is essentially what hypocrisy is.
Showing a contradiction or proving a contradiction.
Yeah, you want, well, usually it's technically supposed to be like proving a contradiction, like logically.
Yeah.
In the sense that like the logical reductio ad absurdum, which is essentially put absurdity by contradiction, like false by contradiction. Like you suppose something and then show that it leads to a contradiction.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not that it's not the supposition. So suppose P, and then suppose, and if P somehow leads to not P, then therefore not P at the beginning. Because if it contradicts itself, you can't do that. It's false.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like actual arguments, it's more of like showing how like it leads to an undesirable outcome, which is not the same, but like it's either like a contradiction outright, which is difficult to get a hold of, or like leads to a very undesirable outcome, or like a almost contradictory outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more about like actual like arguing about things.
Yeah.
But the relation to hypocrisy was there.
Yeah. Disproving things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting. You know, when I was doing my course selection, because I realized that with my leg in its current situation, it would be very difficult for me to try and get a co-op job, which, by the way, I'm still very much behind on, and I don't think that I will be able to find a job in time for September. So I'm thinking that right now I'm leaning more towards just take some more classes in the fall and then actually do co-op in the spring when that's like my scheduled full recovery time, you know? So I looked at my class list and I was like, you know what? There's an open spot in Philosophy 105. Should I take it?
I wouldn't go with 105. I would go with 110.
Yeah, there was no 110 that was offered though. So I ended up not doing 105.
105 is not it's not very challenging.
Yeah? What is
I don't think it would be challenging enough for you.
What is it about?
It's about like critical thinking, but not quite enough.
Critical thinking, but not what?
It's like I haven't taken it, but like from what I've seen, it goes in. There's like a bit of probability at the end, and it's not quite there. But like 110 is like the actual argument. Like this is like P, if not P, A. That if you could take that course would be better. But you can't get in. But like you might not. There might not be space. You might not have. There might not conflict. There might be a conflict, but
yeah, I ended up enrolling my classes far too late because
yeah,
I'm an idiot. So
it's fine.
Yeah.
I
It's
missed
okay.
a class that I wanted to take. Several classes I wanted to take.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I would have loved to take some classes, but because I decided to enroll so late that there was hardly anything left. So
Yeah.
really only one of my classes that I got into is like a class that really matters towards my graduation. But there was this.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because there's this one class that I've wanted to take for like years and years, but the schedule has been terrible, just because I live in Surrey. It's a Burnaby class, and it's basically first thing in the morning, and I'm a terrible person with mornings.
Yeah.
But now it's offered, and it has like a good time slot. But now I'm not so sure I wanted to take it anymore. I ended up taking because I really need to enroll as a full-time student, because I'm going to be going for student loans, right? I'm still on student loans.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll take it, I guess. Yeah, anyways, that's that.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is the class?
Italian. Introductory Italian.
Ah, like Mario.
Sure, it's not the first thing I would think of, but yeah.
It's either Mario or pizza.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What time is it? It's 4. Oh, it's close to 5. Where did my phone go? Yeah, I kind of remembered some of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, but I think we can leave that for next time. And
Just put it in the chat and we can talk about it next time.
yeah, because there's
Write it down.
I still have to listen through what we've talked about today and just write down the thoughts that I had and threw away. Yeah.
But how do you know that the thoughts that you're going to get next time are the same thoughts that you had?
They might not be, but
They probably will.
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, either way, I think it's okay.
The thought has graced you with its presence, and now it leaves.
I don't know about gracing me with its presence. More just like, oh, it was fleeting.
Yeah.
Boy, fleeting it was. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. Anyways, I do think this is a good place to end off for today.
Indeed.
Yeah. We had some good conversations today as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Today was real nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once again, thank you, Sean. It's great having you here to talk about these things. I will definitely look through and listen through what we talked about today, and
Yes.
figure out what I wanted to ask you or talk to you about next time.
Okay.
Yeah. So on that note,
Well,
thank you, Sean, and
thanks to us.
yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. So we will
likewise.
we will conclude today's episode here. Thank you all for listening, and yeah, as always, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.